We've got quite a bit going on in worship today. We are celebrating the ascension of the Lord and the welcoming of our communicants confirmation class members into the full membership of the church. Throw into that mix that today is Mother's Day, and that deserves a mention or two, so the preacher has a number of strings to weave together this morning. The ascension of the Lord brings the Easter cycle to a close. The Jesus on earth story is coming to an end. Ascension stories always tell us something about the one ascending. And the story of Jesus' ascension tells us that his mission is now complete and he is returning to God. Jesus is exalted in the ascension and his lordship is once more confirmed. At the ascension, whether you read the story from Matthew, Mark, or Luke, in one way or another, the instruction is given that the disciples, which means students, are now apostles, which means those who are commissioned and sent forth. In Luke's story, with which we began our worship this morning, we read, "Thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things." You are witnesses of these things. And witnesses tell the stories of what they have seen and heard. The newly commissioned apostles are charged to go to all nations and tell the story that they have lived, continuing to proclaim Jesus' message and living out Jesus' mission. So to celebrate the ascension of the Lord with the welcoming of newly commissioned members of the church is appropriate and fitting. Two of the three threads for the day have come together. Now let's consider the third string. The third string concerns a fellow named Timothy. Now, from what we can tell, Timothy was a friend and a companion of the Apostle Paul. In Acts 16:1, we're told that Timothy was the son of a Jewish woman, while his father was Greek. But questions remain. Was the letter actually written to someone named Timothy? Was the letter written by the Apostle Paul? When was the letter written? These kinds of questions continue to be researched and debated. But the text itself tells us something interesting. We read, "I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that lived first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure lives in you." We don't know if Lois and Eunice converted to Christianity or remained faithful Jews, but frankly, it doesn't matter. The point is that Timothy is who he is today because of Lois and Eunice. Their faith, that is to say their trust in God, was passed down to Timothy. Timothy's sincere faith, which you can translate as unhypocritical faith, was the result of the authentic faith of his mother and grandmother, a faith lived out each day, observed and practiced. Regardless of whether or not Lois and Eunice were Christians or Jews, their witness to Timothy helped him become who he was, a faithful disciple of Jesus Christ. The mention of Lois and Eunice reminds us that women have been at the very center of the church's life and ministry long before the church was the church. Go back to the days of Israel's enslavement of Egypt. When the infant Moses is born, his mother Jochebed and his sister Miriam, along with the midwives Shiphrah and Puah, defied Pharaoh's law and allowed the boy to live. Miriam went on to be viewed as a prophet among her people. Moses' wife Zipporah could not have had an easy life, considering to whom she was married. Deborah was a judge, a prophet, and a military leader. Hannah was the mother of Samuel and gave him to the Lord to serve God all the days of his life. And the list goes on and on and on. Go to the pages of the New Testament. And you find women playing key roles in Jesus' ministry and in the ministry of the early church. The first messengers of Christ's resurrection were women. There were women who accompanied Jesus and the disciples, providing support and care. Go through the pages of the Gospels and Acts and the epistles, and you'll find quite a company of women: Anna, Elizabeth, Dorcas, Lydia, Joanna, Mary, Martha, Priscilla, Rhoda, and Susanna. And if you don't know who they are, it's time that you did. Women have been at the heart of the story of our faith from the earliest days. They have played consequential roles, sometimes even heroic roles, in order for the good news of God's love to be shared and passed on to new generations of disciples. Many of us were raised in the church, maybe not this church, but in a church. In those churches, there were women who played the major role in teaching us the faith. Our Sunday school teachers were primarily women. Our youth group leaders were primarily women. In this church, some of you will remember teachers from along the way: Blanche Young, Candy Thompson, Mary Danatel, and many others who have gone on to the next adventure with God. And there are those who have instilled the faith and continue to pass the faith to the latest generation: Sue Buteau, Gail Rieken, Joan Fedor-Bassmeyer, Emma Nichols, Francie Hubbard, Aaron Carver. Christy Siriano is over there with them right now, and Jerusha Van Camp, and Jenny Singleton, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but do you get the point? If it were not for women in the church, I'm not sure there would be new disciples having their faith formed and shaped and guided. I've told you this story before, but some of you weren't here that day, so here it comes again. When I was growing up in the Parkwood United Presbyterian Church in Allison Park, Pennsylvania, there was a row of women on the sanctuary, 3 rows back on the right. They sat together every week in exactly the same pew, in exactly the same order. I heard it called the widow's row one day, and I asked my parents what that meant. The husbands of all the women in that row died, I was told, and they sat together so they don't have to sit alone. Made sense to me. At the head of the row, right on the aisle, was Mom McKay. That's what everyone called her. Her given name was Florence. She had taught Sunday school for years. She was an every Sunday worshiper, and she had a Bible that was so well worn that we kids thought it had been autographed by the Apostle Paul. Many years later, after my family had moved to the country and we joined another church, after college and seminary, after being ordained, I was called on the phone by the Oakmont Presbyterian Home and asked if I would preach a chapel service on a Sunday afternoon. When you are an associate pastor, you grab at any chance to preach, so I said yes. The day came, and I made my way to Oakmont. I got there uncharacteristically with time to spare, and I went to the pulpit in the chapel to get organized. I went in quickly, got to the pulpit, and when I looked up, there, on the right-hand side, 3 rows back, right on the aisle, was Mom McKay. I could tell it was her because she still had that severe bun that looks like it would make your head hurt to wear it. I couldn't believe my eyes. I walked down to her. She grabbed me and hugged me, and I was 8 years old again. Mom McKay is one of the reasons I am here today. Elizabeth Whiteman, my choir director at the Parkwood Church, is one of the reasons I'm here today. Dr. Bardara McCandless of Westminster College is one of the reasons I am here today. The Reverend Dr. Johanna W.H. Van Wyck Boss, retired Old Testament professor at Louisville Seminary, is one of the main reasons I am here today. And that is to say nothing of Ora Ethel Dobson Sterling Fredley, and she would want me to put all 5 of those names before you. And Ora Lillian Fredley Fleming Hart, my grandmother and my mother. They are Lois and Eunice to my Timothy, though I am getting a little long in the tooth to be comparing myself to young Timothy. They were my first teachers in the faith, and to them I owe everything. Now I tell you all of that, not so you'll say how nice it was that it worked out for me, but because there are in each of your lives those kinds of women. Women who taught you, women who discipled you, women who were there for you. I want you to begin bringing them to the front of your mind. I want you to recall their faces and maybe even be able to hear their voices. I want you to bring them to this moment and realize that you are who you are because of these women. The faith we have is the faith of our mothers. Some of them are related to us through biology. Others are related to us through the waters of baptism and the Spirit. But these women who played a role in you being you must be remembered. They taught you by word and by example. They answered questions you thought were stupid, and they encouraged you to keep going. The faith of our mothers is living still. It flows through our veins. It echoes in our ears. It comforts us when we are hurting. It challenges us when we are complacent. And on this day, when we are called to be witnesses to Jesus Christ and commissioned to be messengers of the good news of the gospel, we are reminded of the women who handed that good news on to us. For the women who shaped us, for the faith of our mothers, for the calling to be witnesses to the love of God, we give thanks for now and evermore. Amen.